Oh, hey, you silly goose. Thanks for coming to the third and mostly final part of this series, I hope. If you haven't seen part 1 and 2, you probably should, as these are meant to be watched in order. But I'm sure a lot of you are here just for this one because she's the one with the most receipts, which, fair. But that also means this part of the series may be the most widely triggering as it covers so much ground. Here's your content warning. If the oppression of marginalized people at the hands of gender-critical anti-trans activists is too much for you right now, skip it. Go watch something else, because that's what this one's about, like all of it. This video serves as a primer on how gender-critical anti-trans activists uphold all the systems put in place to marginalize and subjugate the people they claim to be protecting. And while we're on the subject of the stars of tonight's show, I follow one rule. Unless they have already publicly outed themselves as part of this ideology, I will not use any of their real names or photos. The rest of my caveats and warnings are in part 1, so you should have already heard them. There are no ad breaks in this series, thanks to my wonderful patrons on Patreon, so thank them or join them, or both. There's no binaries here. Anyway, click that subscribe button and the little bell to let me know I have value. That's healthy, right? I'll be fine. This is fine. Just one more. Okay, you ready? Let's do this one last time. Listen, I don't think it's much of a surprise to anyone here that gender-critical anti-trans activists' main targets are trans and queer people. They literally never talk about anything else. They can find a way to shoehorn trans stuff into anything.
What's up with these backpacks at Target? Trans, 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 trans.
Mass indoctrination of children.
Together or to get her.
While they may claim that they aren't against trans people, it's clear that whichever side you're on, there are sides, and gender-critical people and trans people are not on the same one. To people knowledgeable about this, the harms that gender-critical activists and cultists do to gender and sexual minorities is just obvious on the face of it. It's baked into the ideology. That hate is their motivation. It gives them a purpose in life. But just because their focus is on gender and sexual minorities doesn't mean they won't rake their claws through every marginalized group en route to their goals. But of course, when the movement is accused of being platforming and working with white supremacists, racists, homophobes, ableists, and misogynists, they balk. They demand immediate and unassailable evidence, although they have no such standards for themselves. This video, as well as the hundreds of screenshots I couldn't fit into the video, serves as evidence. A disclaimer for those people who only listen to the audio: I'm chock full of white male privilege. Partly due to the way I present in public and on YouTube, society sees me as a cis white gay, and I'm treated very differently than, say, a cis white woman or a man of color would be in the same situation. This is to say that I don't have personal experiences. with how racism and womanhood intersect. So this section is entirely informed by feminist authors who do. Mostly by Ruby Hamad's White Tears, Brown Scars, How White Feminism Betrays Women of Color. It is a very, very good book. So much so that after I read it, I kind of like reading again. It provides a historical framework for the concept of sex, womanhood, and class, something gender-critical activists often claim to be doing themselves. A basic premise of gender-critical ideology is that women are a class in and of themselves, that every woman belongs to, and that class shares the same or similar experiences, enough so that any woman can claim to share the oppression of women. White women, black women, disabled women, gay women, they are all mistreated as women first, and everything else is salt in the wounds. This is shown to be an example here by one of the most prominent gender-critical cult leaders, Kelly J. Keene Minchell, aka Parker Posey. I'm just gonna call her Kelly J because honestly, I don't know what the is going on with all that. She's very unclear. We'll get back to this later though.
I think J.K. Rowling will be spoken of like Rosa Parks, refusing to give up her seat on the bus.
A few days ago, I was browsing a part of the internet with radfems in it. Someone made a mean comment comparing a black woman to a monkey or something similarly stupid like that, and all of the radfems were freaking out about it. There was a lot of whining about how only women of colour are criticising this horrible racist. And I thought, like, most websites have this button, located somewhere in the top right, that says, log out. It makes the mean words disappear. This was a faceless, nameless stranger on the internet. Why did they care so much? If it was like a politician or someone who worked in a public school, I kept bringing attention to it, but they got trolled so hard and expended so much energy into just nonsense that objectively didn't matter.
In White Tears, Brown Scars, Ruby Hamad makes it clear that throughout the history of settler colonial societies, separation of classes did not align most rigidly to sex, but to race. It is a brilliantly argued, well-sourced book that leaves nothing up to interpretation. She lays it out right in front of you.
White people set the standard for humanity by which they, and only they, could succeed. And this standard meant a strict hierarchy that placed white men at the top, with white women just below them, followed by men of colour, then women of colour, occupying the lowest rung.
She lays out the power hierarchy, not from a biased white perspective that diminishes the impact of racism, but from an historically informed realism. Namely, that often white feminists frame their fight as the movement for all women, sisters fighting against the patriarchy. But this erases the very real history of white women's role in the oppression of Black, Indigenous, and women of color. Ruby is illustrating that when white women claim the oppression of women as a whole, they claim the oppression that they themselves benefit from.
There is no sisterhood. How can there be when white supremacy has done such a thorough job of setting white womanhood apart from the rest of us? There's a division, all right, but it is not caused by us. Yes, there is much for white women to still fight for, but consider that every single obstacle to their advancement is placed there by white society, by their own people. Given white women have never had to deal with racial or colonial oppression, it is not surprising, though it is certainly regrettable, that so many of them still regard feminism as a movement purely concerned with gender.
It was a common occurrence for gender-critical women in the groups I was in to act as if they existed outside of the culpability of white society because white men are at the forefront of it, as if they didn't benefit from whiteness simply because they were women.
I hate how racist is thrown around now to shut down bad women. These women wouldn't have a freaking clue.
Every single win for the white women's movement benefited women of color.
If you think you can't be racist against any race, including whites, if you think all blacks are oppressed here in the US, you need to unfriend me. Like, seriously, I am tired of the bullshit victimhood mentality. The only people who are oppressed is those who believe they are. It's called law of attraction. If you believe it, it becomes your reality. Ask any conservative black person and they will tell you they aren't oppressed. And yes, you can be racist against whites. Those in charge, deep state, etc., want this country to be Marxist by using race as their way to create a war. If you truly want to believe the worst about your life, etc., then don't be surprised when that becomes your reality. But don't blame it on anyone else. Accept responsibility.
God, the hatred of heterosexual white women is out of control. The current woke rhetoric is unbearable. We are stupid, bigoted, entitled, racist, ugly, dangerous / violent by virtue of our existence. Ditto the BS about white feminism. I wrote my undergrad honors thesis about black women writers in 1985, no less.
How do we rescue our sub-Saharan / African sisters from the tyranny of the patriarchy and FGM? What are we marginally less bound sisters going to do? How do we throw away the patriarchy with its male wars, competition, torture, and death? How do we reinstate the life-giving creativity of the feminine? Just thinking aloud.
White feminists still overwhelmingly approach the oppression of women as one informed primarily, if not solely, by gender, and, as a result, they cannot seem to conceive of imperialism as a feminist issue, if they think of it at all.
Ruby is saying that modern white feminism constructs a worldview that there are two classes of people in all cultures, men and women. And women, although divided into different races, cultures, and ethnicities, are still all the class women as a whole, and that their oppression is most informed by that.
Our experiences are not the same. We fight through oppression from birth. Race adds to that, but it happens to all women. I really hate when people say white women have it easy. White is one thing, female is another. Get with a knife at your throat? Yeah, so easy. If you're white, the trauma doesn't count, I guess.
But to claim the denigration of the women of color as part of your own class struggles as a white woman is to ignore that white women themselves are treated as a class separate from women of color. That the oppression of women of color is often to the benefit of white women, whether they like it or not.
From the beginnings of settler colonial societies, race was gendered and gender was raced. Only white men were man and only white women were woman. For hundreds of years, excluding women of color from womanhood has been key to maintaining this racial hierarchy, and white women have been both privileged and subordinated by it. It seems clear to me that this is why it is women of color who remain most marginalized and most at risk of violence and discrimination. There are other intersections such as sexual orientation, gender identity, and disability, but add race into the mix, and every single one of them becomes exponentially more prohibitive and dangerous.
This is something that I see white, queer, and trans people do as well. It's something I've done in the past when I was less informed. Like a white, non-binary person like me living in a major city in Canada saying we're being murdered when almost all murders of trans people are poor women of color, it's not a reflection of my reality. I'm obviously not saying it's safe, comfortable, or easy for any queer or trans person, including myself. What I'm saying is that to view trans people as the main target of these murders is to diminish the realities of racism. It is to claim an experience that is not ours to claim. The thing is, trans and queer people haven't based our entire worldview on this concept. We know there's so much more going on than this one statistic, but the gender critical movement is entirely, from its very core, based on a concept that serves to uphold white supremacy and dictate womanhood through its terms. When Ruby says that
the white feminist battle is not one that aims to dismantle the hierarchy, but merely seeks to ensure that white women join white men at its helm by agitating only against those limitations imposed on their sex.
She means it, and she means things like this. In Linda Gordon's book, The Second Coming of the KKK, she coins the term bigoted feminism, while detailing in her book the struggles of white women who fought to gain equal footing in the KKK, eventually having their own chapter, the WKKK. And before the gender critters say I'm saying they're in the live, laugh, lynch mob, I'll go on the record saying I have no evidence any of them are directly tied to the KKK. Although there is ample evidence of a gender-critical activist platformed by the BBC calling for the lynching of trans women in great detail with names. This isn't to say white women aren't or weren't oppressed for being women, only that the image gender-critical activists paint of white women and women of color both being property of men is not an accurate picture. That the culpability of white women has long been downplayed by white feminism. That you don't need to create a power structure to participate and benefit from it.
It all leads back to the same place. And that place is the rift that European colonialism deliberately created between women, making white women complicit in the racism they have since been all too eager to blame solely on white men. Because white women were not passive bystanders to the racial crimes of white men. They were co-conspirators. Why do white women struggle to read and apply the words of women of colour? Audre Lorde answered this question almost 40 years ago, calling out the reluctance of white women to recognise women of colour as women and yet different from themselves. She challenges them to drop their defensiveness and their imposition that gender is the master oppression. For as long as any difference between us means one of us must be inferior, then the recognition of any difference must be fraught with guilt, Lorde explains. To allow all women of colour to step out of stereotypes is too guilt-provoking, for it threatens the complacency of those women who view oppression only in terms of sex. In other words, white women largely ignore the writing of women of colour because their own self-image can only be maintained by viewing and treating assertive, or God forbid critical women of colour as problematic stereotypes, as aggressive and angry bullies who don't appreciate all that feminism has done for them. The alternative would be not only to accept the limitations of their own feminism, but to admit that their progress has come and continues to come at the expense of other women.
And all of this is shown over and over again in gender-critical ideology. When the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan hit the news, the gender-critical response was swift. I mean, a movement that claims to be centered on fighting the subjugation of women, you would assume would divert their attention to this and these women in need. And I guess they did the divert your attention part. But instead of empathy for these women, this group of predominantly white women used the suffering of women of color to make jabs about trans people. The Taliban know what a woman is, can't identify out of that. They posted en masse as if bragging that they've got the Taliban on their side. Like somehow that would look good for them. As if the fact that the Taliban oppresses women or gender and sexual minorities somehow makes gender critical beliefs more valid because they align with the Taliban's.
Taliban going door to door to seize girls as young as 12 for sex slaves. The Taliban seem to know the difference between sex and gender, so why don't the Scottish Government? #women won't waste, #misogyny.
The Taliban know exactly what a woman is without having to ask for preferred pronouns. Why do you think that is?
The Taliban needs to check, though, under each burqa and make sure it's a true train, don't you think? And if not, then make the necessary adjustments here, sort of a tit for twat, maybe with those big curved swords.
Incels know what a woman is. Taliban know what a woman is. Left-wing men, woman is so indefinable. If it's anything, it's a quality of wanting subservience, to be sexually abused. Such a turn on. If you don't see the obscenity of it now, I don't know what will make you see.
To claim that you support women when you align yourself with those who you yourself say oppress them, it wasn't uncommon to come across entirely mask-off Islamophobia in the group. For instance, white women saying that multiculturalism is impossible, and if that culture's hurt women, they need to be destroyed.
Now, in return, please don't come here with the attitude that you can bully your way into top-tier jobs that women were able to get for themselves through getting their bare heads busted and vote and wear pants and drive and so on while wearing that stupid covering. Don't expect my business because you are wearing a sign that says you are not as opposed to my violent assault as if it was one of your own. It does say so right in the Quran. And if you try to get a good government job, plan on me and mine working to get you out until you dress secularly and represent all Americans, not just your group. This applies to all religions, especially Abrahamic ones. I hate seeing crosses, hijabs, stars of David, or any repressive symbol on a woman. It just means she was given a nickel by some medieval BS to let men come and take away every other woman's freedom and use them as baby machines and slaves. You're welcome. I think multiculturalism is impossible because religions are mostly used to control women. When cultures hurt women, they need to be destroyed. Surely that's obvious to anyone.
One might ask Made Up Name if she was as keen on destroying the white settler colonial culture that routinely harms women across the entire globe. You know, the same women she pretends to be championing by demanding the destruction of their culture. Just like white women did when they stripped away the children of indigenous women because they knew in their guts that they would take much better care of them, being real women who knew how to raise a baby.
White women maternalists leveraged their roles as white mothers even though many of them were single and child-free. They claimed that because they were women, they were much better placed than white men to understand and respond to the needs of indigenous women and their children. This professed valorization of motherhood did not extend to indigenous mothers, whom they disparaged as sexually immoral and unfit for motherhood. If white women were the only true women, then by the same token, white mothers were the only true mothers. They saw their role not as depriving indigenous children of their families, but as rescuing and saving them from their uncivilized parents. Indigenous women claim the maternalists, invoking the trope of the drudge, make slaves of themselves for the men, as Helen Gibson Stickdale, a missionary in Idaho, complained. Similarly, the Australian anthropologist Daisy Bates asserted of Aboriginal communities, all of their laws were formed for the convenience and well-being of the men only. Because colonized women did not adhere to cultural roles akin to white womanhood, white women assumed they were oppressed, and this status was used to actually oppress them further. One could fairly say that indigenous cultures were not oppressive enough of women for the liking of white society. White women criticized everything about indigenous motherhood, from how they carried their babies to the structure of the homes they raised them in. In the end, the only thing that could save these children was for white women to take them.
I told a female Native American trans rights activist that I identified as Native American, and she almost lost her shit. Demanded proof. I told her I didn't need any. All I had to do was make my claim. We went back and forth. She was increasingly upset, but not about males appropriating women.
I know you're gaslighting, but that's hilarious.
Nothing else got through her thick skull. She understood this.
The gender-critical ideology relies on boiling down the terms women and men to dictionary definitions and biology, despite settler colonial society never really having operated that way. In doing so, they erase the lived experiences of women of color, like author Melissa Lukashenko, who maintains it is white racism, not sexism or misogyny, that is the dominant form of oppression experienced by Aboriginal women. What you call patriarchy, I call one aspect of colonization. For all their commonalities, for all your hoping and wishing it, our oppressions are not interchangeable. Playing "but white women are powerless too, let's be powerless together" has no appeal, nor indeed meaning, for most Native women. Despite the general diversity of opinions in Aboriginal society, the strong stance that Aboriginal women take against the white women's movement remains universal. Struggle with our men occurs laterally, across and within our movement. It does not occur vertically between white women and Indigenous women on one side and white men and Native men on the opposing side. To frame the struggle in terms of gender equity leaves an entire realm of life unaccounted for. In their eagerness to coalesce, white feminists have been rightly accused of ignoring or eliding differences between and among women. While, like other Indigenous women, I recognize the invaluable contributions that feminists have made, I also believe that their well-documented failure to engage and acknowledge the complicity of white women in the history of domination positions mainstream feminism alongside other colonialist discourses. To put it as simply as possible for the white gender-critical people scratching their heads right now, you often say that women are oppressed first and foremost by their sex. Everything is secondary, including race. But that's because you only experience misogyny and not racism. So from your point of view, the one that happens to you must be the worst because you can feel how much it fucking sucks. But you don't experience racism, you benefit from it. That's how whiteness works. So you'll never be able to feel what it's like to experience it. You have no valid lived experiences to say misogyny is worse than racism when you only have half the picture. It's having such a self-centered worldview that you can't even fathom that your worldview isn't accurate. Just because your experiences are real does not make them universal. Your lived experiences are heckin' valid, but they are part of billions of women's lived experiences. What are the odds that in a world with so many people and cultures, so many women with unique lives, that all of their experiences that form their understanding of womanhood are going to align in a way that fits into your pre-existing Western worldview? Seems a little presumptuous. And if you learn that your worldview needs expanding, and then you allow it to, great, love that. But for white anti-trans activists to admit this would be to admit that white women themselves are a class, and that they are treated entirely differently than women of color and experience different forms of misogyny, like misogynoir.
White women can oscillate between their gender and their race, between being the oppressed and the oppressor. Women of colour are never permitted to exist outside of these constraints. We are both women and people of colour, and we are always seen and treated as such.
The view of women as a single class of person implies that discrimination based on sex and gender transcends discrimination based on race. And not only is that implied, it's outright stated. Careful, this one's a doozy. Do you remember Central Park Karen? Because the gender critical people did. I'm sorry, but in order to talk about this, I need to play the full video. I'm sorry, it's like really fucking ugly to watch.
Would you please stop? Sir, I'm asking you to stop.
Please don't come close to me.
Sir, I'm asking you to stop recording me.
Please don't come close to me.
Please take your phone off.
Please don't come close to me.
And I'm taking a picture and calling the cops.
Please call the cops. Please call the cops.
I'm going to tell them there's an African-American man threatening my life.
Please tell them whatever you like.
Excuse me? I'm sorry, I'm in the Ramble, and there is a man, African-American, he has a bicycle helmet. He is recording me and threatening me and my dog. There is an African-American man, I am in Central Park. He is recording me and threatening myself and my dog. And my... I'm sorry, I can't hear you either. I'm being threatened by a man in the Ramble. Please send the cops immediately. I'm in Central Park in the Ramble. I don't know.
Thank you.
Here's the thing. When it comes to gender critical ideology, white women are not allowed to be seen as anything but a victim unless they've come out against gender critical ideology.
It is one of the goals of Black Lives Matter to destroy the family unit.
Because while they say hate has no home here, the one hatred that is agreed upon across all cultures as acceptable is the hatred of women, because people care more about racism than sexism, and especially misogyny.
People can at least see racial injustice. Misogyny is so normal it's invisible. Black men are capable of raping, and are socialized to do so, and control of attempt to control all women, the biosphere, and everything else they can get their hands on. Note that you had to ask this question in a woman-friendly, safe space, because it isn't safe to even ask this question in the male stream.
This is why gender critical people will twist themselves into a knot to defend even obviously abhorrent people. Because if white women are always the victim, then the majority of the people in these groups are also always the victim. It's very convenient.
Yes, people were saying she'd called the police just because she was racist, as if she'd come across a black man and was calling police solely because she wanted to see him get killed. As if, and this was assumed by many, when the police show up to a scene where a white woman has called them and there's a black man there, the police should be presumed to act like some sort of hit squad on behalf of any white woman with a complaint. It was astounding to see people making comment after comment that could only make sense if you did believe that police instantly kill all black men when they're present at the scene when responding to a 911 call. Of course, there are millions of police contacts with citizens daily, many of them with black men, and the police definitely do not just gun down every black man they come across. There are obviously problems with inappropriate use of force, but that is not an even vaguely accurate representation of any of them.
There's a key part of this video that every single person in these comments refused to address. Feeling threatened and someone threatening to kill you are not the same thing. Further, she outright states to him, I'm going to call the police and tell them an African American man is threatening my life. Why, pray tell him that she's going to highlight his race to the cops. She's not giving a description to the police when she says that, she's talking to him.
I'm going to tell them there's an African American man threatening my life.
It was an actual threat. If anyone's life was actually threatened, he has a stronger case. Not only that, but she's following him and he's retreating, telling her to stop.
Please don't come close to me.
Sir, I'm asking you to stop recording me.
Please don't come close to me.
Please take your phone off.
Please don't come close to me.
So when I read the comments, I was fucking gobsmacked at how disingenuous and downright ignorant almost every single gender critical person was. They really could not even for a second comprehend that a white woman had any power over a black man at all. Now, I tried my best not to get involved in discussions, but this one was so unbelievably f***ed up that I had to, and I fully broke my don't act like Kaylin rule when I got into an argument with Kelly J.
I read man before black and woman before white. It helped.
So race is secondary, do you think? Still trying to learn all this social levels stuff.
I think misogyny kills more than racism.
Oh, I am still confused on the situation, but thank you for trying.
For me, I saw the power dynamic as one where the woman was in the more vulnerable position.
I see, that part makes sense to me, but why did she lie and say he was threatening her life?
What are you expecting from me? A lone woman was told by a man that she wouldn't like what he was going to do. Past that, I genuinely don't care what she said to get herself out of danger.
And she wasn't saying he was African American just to police. She said it to him. She said, I'm going to call the police and I'm going to tell them there's an African American man threatening my life. Exactly those words. Why would she say that to him? He knows he is African American. It is very obvious what she is saying and why. I usually agree with this group, but this is just lies. I thought we were about reality being reality. A lot are saying, I would have thought he was trying to hurt my dog too. Okay, that is fair. But that is also not a threat to her life. Why not say I think he is threatening my dog? Why lie?
I am unashamed in centering women and understanding the threat of male violence above everything. You seem to be on the side of the threatening man. 'Twas ever thus.
Not Dollarama Marilyn Monroe saying 'twas ever thus during a Facebook argument, please. Her entire argument is that her life was threatened by this guy implying he was going to take her dog out of the no-leash area using a dog treat. To claim that she was threatened, even though she stuck around for minutes later, strangling her f***ing dog, going after him physically, and refusing to leave. There's no way to defend that this woman was terrified without ignoring and obfuscating facts and outright lying. It's so bitterly... Is it a bug? Oh, no. Okay. It's so bitterly fucking obvious that these white people literally look at this.
I'm going to tell them there's an African American man threatening my life.
Please tell them whatever you like.
There is an African American man. I am in Central Park. He is recording me and threatening myself and my dog. And my... I'm sorry, I can't hear you either. I'm being threatened by a man in the Ramble. Please send the cops immediately.
And actually see a victim in fear. Like they see that and believe it. Is that because they see this behavior in their own sisterhood of white victimhood? In gender critical ideology, it's Central Park Karen who's the victim of racist profiling, seeing that Karen among these women has become a slur against white women. They claim the real issue in this situation is misogyny, that if a white woman claims to be afraid of a black man, she has license to do whatever it is she wishes. Kelly J spelled this out herself. She doesn't care that white women have felt threatened by men of color who have done nothing to them except not be white in their presence. That white women have had black men killed for that. She doesn't consider the history of white women abusing, killing, and owning black men relevant. She doesn't care. The only thing that matters is this white woman's feelings. Because when you say you place sex over race, you deny the reality that white women in society do have power over black men. Simply because it doesn't align with your childish worldview that comes down to the power is held by who is physically stronger, as if white slave-owning women didn't frequently rape black men, as if a racist police force coming to save a white woman from a black man threatening to kill her doesn't tip the fucking scales of physical power anyways. To believe their worldview requires that you pretend that white supremacy and settler colonialism only benefit white men. And to go even further and claim not only did Central Park Karen do nothing wrong, but that she was the victim? This archetype of the perpetual victim that gender-critical women uphold is an archetype Ruby Hamad refers to as the damsel.
The damsel can only be white. Only white women were considered worthy of protecting because only white women could ensure the continuation of a pure white race. Black women, indigenous women, native women, all colonized women were similarly regarded as lacking in innocence because their bodies were already freely, openly, and liberally transgressed by white men. White women could achieve acceptance by behaving in certain ways or pretending to. Racialized women, however, were doomed no matter what they said or did. When white women invoke the damsel, they resurrect this bloody history. This is what makes white women's tears so damaging and, yes, so violent when they are turned against people of color, and especially, as is increasingly often the case these days, against women of color.
But Kelly J says it's okay to lie to the police. Not only that, it's okay to do anything you want if you're a woman who is afraid, regardless of whether that fear is valid. I wonder if her need to reduce everything down to its least nuanced explanation is due to her inability to think beyond that, or if it's simply because she finds dog whistles such an effective strategy. The less words you say, the less words people can use against you. I mean, either way, it works for her. It works on the people she's selling her ugly-ass merch to, people who also find nuance to be nothing but a nuisance. Just basing your entire ideology on surface-level claims like, I think misogyny kills more than racism, as if, even if that were quantifiable, who dies more would somehow also tell the intricate story that is how their lives were lived and affected by each other. You know, reality, not lived in a vacuum. And when the bodies of thousands of Indigenous children from abusive residential schools were exhumed in Canada, Meghan Murphy took the time to write a post about how she disliked how the media was framing the situation, lamenting about how most people wanted to celebrate Canada Day, but the Prime Minister bowed down to hashtags that condemned celebrating a country that would do this. The Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, whose father was PM during the time the residential schools operated, suggested the country think of those for whom it's not yet a day of celebration. Of course, celebration and consideration are not mutually exclusive. And despite the fact that the majority of Canadians wanted to celebrate on July 1st, hashtag Cancel Canada Day trending on Twitter was enough for these politicians. I'm sorry you had to pretend to feel bad about having a barbecue in a country you aren't even proud to be part of. That must be super difficult for you. In her comments were conspiracy theories about the situation, most notably that this is an attack on Christianity itself. Meghan herself liked this.
True, but I question the timing of the discovery of these children's bodies. At a time when Christianity is being attacked, I think it's much too convenient that we suddenly found their bodies when we've known for decades that this kind of thing was happening. What is the purpose of finding their bodies now? Get rid of Christianity? Institute globalization as we begin to hate on our own country?
Gender-critical people get accused of being racist a lot. I wonder why.
What I'm coming from, though, I'm being honest now, this is hate. I'm seeing hate. Yeah, I'm saying misogyny. Well, I'm seeing misogyny. Where you can't even understand what women as you as a woman as well, as you as well, who has faced oppression. I don't understand how you can oppress another marginalised community. That's my thing.
Men are not oppressed.
We're not talking about men. You as women, women are oppressed. That's not. Women have been oppressed, and you are now on the basis of what? On the basis of what? On the basis of what, mate? On the basis of what? On the basis of what? What are flashing your penis. So you got all your penis around you.
But in response to being accused of racism, how do gender-critical people in the group respond? And of course they aren't. They aren't that racist, because when they want to see slurs, they have to go to 4chan. Or that they couldn't possibly be racist, because they have family members that are people of color. And outside of the group, on Twitter, where it's not mostly white women.
Just a reminder that TERFs and gender criticals are white supremacists who've co-opted feminism to mask their bigotry.
Of course, to say that gender critical ideology upholds standards of white supremacy in the West is not saying that there are no people of color in the movement. There are women who fight against women's rights, there are closeted gays who become anti-gay leaders, and there are indeed people of color who uphold white supremacy through their ideological beliefs. When women of color who don't agree with gender critical ideology say this online, though, they get dogpiled. Accusations that Roslyn, a cis queer feminist and advocate for trans rights, may secretly be a man. After all, a real woman wouldn't disagree with gender critical ideology. A real woman wouldn't be calling the ideology racist. Calls for Roslyn to be locked up for her opinions, saying this Filipino Canadian sounds white, accusing a survivor and anti-rape activist of being a filthy rape apologist. In defense of this accusation, a couple dozen quote tweets saying things like, "I'm not even white," or "I'm so white," in an attempt, I guess, to prove that their actions don't uplift white supremacy. Sort of like if I actively campaigned in laws that restrict gay couples' rights to adopt, and then when accused of homophobia said, "I'm so straight." Like, nobody's innate identity dictates their morality or their actions. And of course, can someone back this up with a single piece of evidence? If you want more information, feel free to read White Tears, Brown Scars. If you're a white gender critical woman, you probably won't though, as I'm sure no amount of evidence will ever be enough for you, given that your entire ideology necessitates that the claims of women of color who disagree with you must be bullshit. If any gender critical women of color want to offer a counterpoint to the feminists of color that I've quoted, feel free to leave a message here. YouTube deletes like most of my comments as controversial, so I wanted to make sure there was a place to send them where I could actually read them. This section could be an entire video of its own, but I had to cut a lot out here. If you're interested in this though, leave a comment in the C section, and maybe I'll elaborate on this at some point. There's also more here. I know there are gender critical people watching this, so even if you don't decide to stop your crusade against trans people, I hope you'll at least take the words of feminist women of color who aren't in your cult to heart.
Acknowledging that homosexual behaviour is a sinful act is not an act of abuse, and people who think it is don't grasp Christianity. They are cattle to our Hinduism at this point, glorified beyond their humanity in the media, to the point where it is a complete certainty that children are identifying as GLBT, far beyond any natural inclination that might exist, just because of the social prestige and the fact that said identification gives you an ironclad social shield. The physical reality of male homosexuality has been whitewashed to the point where no one can even speak about the very real medical facts at play. For instance, in their rates of serious STDs, the social realities, well, that's another can of worms. The egregious and disgusting sexual behaviour of homosexual males resulted in the deaths of thousands of innocent haemophiliacs and trauma victims. I mean, partying all night with 10 different men in your anus is no one else's business until you stop at the blood bank on the way home in the morning.
We've already fairly thoroughly documented the amount of straight up homophobia and homophobic talking points they espouse, but that was just mostly thought leaders. Maybe the people in the groups don't share the same mentality at all. Well, that's unlikely, given that they do warn you if you don't like homophobia, some gender critical groups might upset you, as we talked about earlier. Examples of this very casual but blatant homophobia would be gender critical activists saying things like this.
Gay men should not be given children.
Or this.
I have a big problem with gay men adopting kids. I'm not an authority and I can't stop it, but if you ask me, it's not okay.
The only pro-LGB organization they support is, of course, the LGB Alliance, which is actually just a front for disseminating anti-trans gender-critical propaganda. Leaders of the organization have come out against banning conversion therapy for LGBT people, as well as have actively shown themselves to be ignorant and hostile towards the importance of gay rights, calling into question whether LGBT people even need to have equal rights like same-sex marriage, or calling bisexual people straight. In response to a lesbian discussing being raped by her female partner, saying that lesbians do not report as we are used to homophobic behavior, that we keep our mouths shut, we are afraid of the police laughing at us. We are afraid of the humiliation of having to say we were raped by another woman. We are afraid that no one will take us seriously. LGB Alliance's response was to say publicly that if she was raped, it wasn't by a woman, because rape requires a penis. So either it wasn't rape or it wasn't a woman who raped her. This is effectively removing lesbians' ability to talk about sexual domestic violence in favor of outdated and heterosexist ideas of rape and assault. How is denying the rape of lesbians supporting lesbians? There are actual foundations that help LGBT people, though, like Stonewall. While LGB Alliance focuses almost entirely on anti-trans campaigning, Stonewall does real work, like helping gay refugees escape countries where they're at risk, as opposed to people on the gender-critical side who may suggest homosexual conversion therapy as a solution. The reason why gender-critical people as a group are so detached from the realities of gender and sexual minorities, like gays and lesbians, is that they're mostly straight. I mean, most groups are mostly straight. But they are a group mostly comprised of cis-straight white people who think being effeminate and a man means you're a danger to women.
No, men don't wear women's clothing or makeup for fun. It's always a fucking fetish. If it isn't from the beginning, it always evolves into a fetish. Full blown.
Men's femininity is absolutely a threat to women. Cross-dressing is a common and well-known paraphilia associated with serial killers,
who think gay men shouldn't be allowed to raise children because children need mothers.
Also, he has a kid with no mother. He's aware that he has really fouled up the order of things. Men don't have husbands. Children need mothers. He's trying to set things right in an odd way possible. Anyway, if he is old enough to rob kids of a mother, he's old enough to work this out on his own.
Who think being gay is not only a choice, but the wrong one, who have no understanding of gay liberation or radical queer revolution. They harbor and allow these beliefs in their communities, yet accuse lesbians, gays, bisexuals who support trans people of being homophobic. It's bitterly ironic because in the LGBTQ+ community, you know, made entirely of people who are actually affected by homophobia, we actively call out homophobia at every turn. In our own communities, in other communities, and then gender-critical people accuse us of calling everything homophobic, somehow painting us as both people who are overzealous in fighting homophobia, but also homophobes? And they shout that we're homophobes from alt-right homophobic publications platformed and paid for by the anti-gay Christian right. They shout us down while claiming to be silenced, calling us homophobic even as they fight to keep gay conversion therapy legal. They come into LGBTQ+ communities and try and silence us, police us, tell us who we are and threaten us. They deny our rapes, they laugh at our deaths, and they celebrate our pain. And they hold out the handful of cis gay people, also obsessed with halting trans liberation, as a shield against scrutiny. But you can be reduced from a lesbian to a handmaid like this. All you have to do is disagree with them. In fact, you don't even get to continue to be called a woman if you disagree. Because if there's one thing you can't have gender-critical communities without, the biggest hypocrisy of them all, the absolute blatant misogyny and disregard for women with dissenting opinions. In the constant assault on gender and sexual minorities and our allies by these anti-trans activists, one term became popular to silence a woman who dared to speak her mind. This term was devised solely to invalidate a woman's opinion and her worth in the conversation, effectively attempting to silence her for participating in the conversation at all. It is hurled at women and women alone with vitriol and disgust. That term is handmaid or handmaiden.
Ugh, handmaiden traitor. What a fucking handmaiden.
I think some trainee handmaid is about to report me, so I'm probably headed for another 30-day suspension. And I was so careful. See you all on the other side.
In reaction to a cis woman saying, "I'm not going to stand for this transphobia," a gender-critical activist replies, "I'm not going to stand for this transphobia? Girl, shut the fuck up."
Then sit.
Or kneel, which is honestly all these handmaids do.
Although this term has its roots back to radical feminism, referring to handmaidens of the patriarchy, it's clear from the usage of modern gender-critical people that quite a lot of them don't know this. They use it in reference to Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, often using handmaid as opposed to handmaiden, referring to the other characters in the story or the author herself.
To all the handmaidens and Aunt Lydia's, knock it off for today and spare a thought for Afghan women who will be enslaved and sold as livestock by the Taliban. Clearly, their sex will be a prized commodity. No effing gender identity will save them.
The Handmaid's Tale takes place in a dystopian America called Gilead and is centered around a class of women called handmaids. Handmaids are women who are held captive, raped monthly or more, and who have no rights, freedoms, or independence. They are slaves used for their bodies, tortured and sexually assaulted in an attempt to pregnate them and take their children. Why people on the side of women would use this term to refer to other women just because they disagree with them is not for me to make guesses about. I will say it's disgusting and misogynistic as f***. To believe that whenever a woman disagrees with you and your ideology, she's letting men do her thinking for her, as if the only way to be a real woman is to agree with Megan Arsler Murphy or Maria Conversion Therapy Keffler. You're gonna use being raped as an insult? Like, what the fuck? You're gonna say they should just kneel because that's what they're used to? Because they are women who disagree with your ideology and speak for themselves? What the is wrong with you? And just like they did with the Taliban, they make note that in Gilead, only cis women are held as handmaidens. What they don't mention is that just like in gender-critical ideology, Gilead's beliefs were extremely homophobic and transphobic, and gender and sexual minorities were hung on the wall as gender traitors. Gender-critical activists even go as far as to call Margaret Atwood herself,
"She's a quisling handmaid herself, has caved to the panty sniffers."
Gender-critical people often claim that the acronym TERF is a slur for women, even though it's used for both women and men. Graham Linehan gets called a TERF all the time. In fact, pretty much anyone who is transphobic will get called a TERF now. But there is a term that is being used solely against women to silence them, and it's handmaid. Nothing gender-critical people accuse others of is ever anything but projection. Like their frequent accusations of cis women being secretly trans. They'll post photos of female athletes with captions like,
"Is this athlete a woman?" Some pictures are not very flattering.
Well, you too. Let's see how you look when you just compete in the fucking Olympics.
How many men do you think could be competing as women in world sports but never actually get found out? Do competitors have to prove their sex? Been watching some of the Olympic women's rugby sevens and am convinced some of the players are men.
When it's necessary to insult trans women, they immediately go to gendered stereotypes. In this instance, someone took a screenshot of a company Instagram photo, and a woman in the photo was trans. They immediately began commenting on her outfit and appearance, comments like,
A real woman would have coordinated her outfit with the others.
They're dressed casually, but in a normal way. The Tim is dressed like a straight-up child. Grown women just don't wear things like that, especially if they're getting their picture taken. Just one of the many ways that these dudes have no clue what it actually is like to be a woman.
Regardless of the fact that other people in the group said that that wasn't true for them. They were like,
I'd wear that. I'm 36.
Are you neurotypical?
The fact is that any movement that tries to exclude trans people through policing visible gender nonconformity will always, by necessity, also limit the freedom of expression of women.
I felt the same despair when my daughter cut hers off. Like a punch in the gut when she shows me the cuts that she wants. It just keeps getting shorter and shorter. Hugs, Mama.
I'm at the hair salon with my daughter. This is always a traumatic experience for me now. We went from luscious blonde hair down her back to a buzz cut 6 months ago. Now she's starting to grow it again, but I hold my breath while we are here, so afraid she will tell them to do a flat top butch cut again when I'm not nearby.
Even tall women are not women enough at first glance for some of these people anymore.
Help! Whenever I see a tall woman now, I question whether he is a man or not. Anyone else?
Restrictive gender norms that feminists fought so long to abolish are even celebrated among gender-critical parents, forcing their daughters to shave their legs or their armpits or cover them up.
Y'all, we are shaving armpits in 15 minutes to prep for the first day of school. This is huge. I am going to enjoy and cherish this moment so much.
Shave pits or cover pits? She can pick.
Yeah, my girl had to do the armpit thing for a while too. Even I did that when I was young. You get over it pretty fast with the extra sweating. If she still has hairy armpits when it's time for the wedding, just tell her you're not sure if pets are allowed in too.
Even going as far as to pay their children to adhere to patriarchal ideas of womanhood.
I bribed my female-to-male kid $20 a month to shave her legs. I'm happy to pay it.
Or lying to their children about their body hair and the way it works to get them to comply with their parents' demands on their bodies.
I told my son that they would grow back thicker and hairier if he shaves. He's only 13 at the moment, so not very hairy, and they are fine and blonde. Not sure what will happen as he gets older.
Lying they get supported in a gold star sticker by the people who run the group.
I love the excellent use of a falsehood about the hair growing back thicker. A gold star sticker for you.
Teaching children that body hair is something to be ashamed of if they believe you're a girl is, at the bare minimum, misogyny. But in actuality, it enforces the patriarchal idea of white feminine womanhood as a standard for women. And this harms all women, but especially women who will never match those unreasonable standards. Ableism is rampant in the gender-critical community. Of course, you can't avoid ableism in a community that claims certain people are dangerous enemies of society because they're criminally insane, demented perverts. It's embedded deeply into the fabric of the gender-critical cult. Everything from group moderators using phrases like the line between autistic and normal, to guessing whether trans people are autistic based on their bodies and demeanor.
I found only 2 photos of her son, who is now her daughter. I know it's a generalization, I could be very wrong, but looking at this photo, this young man could possibly be autistic, or I looked at his pose, hands in fists, facial expression.
One of the most dangerous forms of ableism is when society unduly strips people of their right to independence and bodily autonomy due to being disabled. When disabled people say, "I know what I want, and my disability is not a proof of otherwise," and are met with hand-waving. The same thinking of, "I know better than you because I don't see you as an individual person with your own internal reality," that led parents to deny their children's sexualities is now being used to deny their children's gender, and disability is being used as an excuse. They use their child's status as disabled or neurodivergent to try and control their children through legal means, well into adulthood, stripping them of their independence and basic rights. Remember Dorothy and her child's big, strong body? Someone suggested that she should use her child's autism to strip them of their bodily autonomy. Doesn't sound likely, but can you get guardianship? This was the adult kid in med school. Dorothy lamented that unfortunately she wouldn't be able to get away with it, or she would attempt it. The reason she couldn't get away with it?
Guardianship would be impossible. He's much too high functioning and presents as neurotypical.
How is that unfortunate? And like most groups that center the feelings and experiences of the majority over everyone else, they really like the R slur.
Anyone else remember this case where a very profoundly got her puberty blocked in some freak? She was never expected to go past infant development, but people still thought it was wrong to stunt her growth and prevent puberty. There's an old-fashioned word that describes him.
Totally agree. And the mental retardation it takes for them to think they have any authority.
This is non-stop Tropic Thunder full stuff. SOS.
This is the header of a group that Kelly J and Megan Murphy are in. And before you say this isn't emblematic of what the thought leaders of the gender critical movement believe, that this is just a random group on Facebook, this is a place where Megan Murphy and Kelly J Keane post and comment. I don't know any actual feminist who would join a group that put slurs we knew weren't okay in the 1900s in its banner. Honestly, I was even surprised by the blatantness of this. But I guess maybe I shouldn't be. I mean, I know Megan Murphy specifically and recently uses this word as an insult for people who she dislikes.
Words that you didn't even read. None of these are even on my Patreon.
But to hang it up literally on a banner is just so yes, it's so ugly, but it's so cringe too. Like children, petulant children playing make-believe activists while making fun of people's appearances, building little straw man dollies to yell at. How do you claim to support women if you make an environment so hostile to disabled women that you leave no room for their safety among you? TERF is a f***ing slur? But this isn't? Spare me. When it comes down to it, as a group, the only women supported by gender-critical ideology are gender-critical women who recite the script and don't challenge them on their racism or bigotry. The only cause the gender-critical movement fights for is subjugation and vilification of trans people, if not the outright elimination of them altogether. I think it's important for gender-critical people to see that there is a way out, to realize what they become a part of. I'll never be the one to convince them, but I spoke to an ex-gender critical anti-trans activist turned trans activist who got out of the cult and has been helping to share her story and tell the truth about gender critical people since. I'll let an ex-gender critical activist explain her story on how she got into and out of the movement.
Since I was a teen, my personal ethics have involved recognizing the diversity of human beings, respecting the rights of marginalized groups, and supporting them in whatever way possible. While some might use the term social justice warrior, I've never thought of myself in that way. Having perceived myself as different since I was a kid, I found out why recently after a full psych assessment I am autistic. I was always vocal about the rights of others. Having 2 autistic children, as well as struggling with mood, anxiety issues throughout my own life, only bolstered my belief in advocacy. I joined Twitter in 2010 at the suggestion of my then publisher. I'm incredibly introverted in real life, so interacting with others from the safety of a keyboard was appealing. At first, I focused on talking to other authors, then focused quite a bit on autism acceptance, as well as kicking off anti-Semitic trolls. I gradually became online friends with a number of trans women. At some point, that led to arguing with GCers, mostly women. These interactions were horrible. I found the GC women to be incredibly prejudiced and cruel. They disliked me, and I disliked them. There was a particular angry thread that lasted for months, and that many GCers would still remember, as well as a number of trans people. And then, a certain Canadian trans woman's behavior, including claims of sexual harassment, became a focus of attention everywhere. When I realized that nothing was being done in Canada to ensure the safety of others from this person, I was incensed. I first turned to a prominent trans woman who is involved in Canadian politics. She was incredibly helpful and encouraged me to try and see if there were any potential victims of this person and to ask them to contact her. My desire to make sure authorities were at least aware of the now notorious trans women became my main focus online and in real life. I can get very obsessive. I would talk constantly about her to my family, who'd often leave the room. Even my youngest child knew all about her, which I now realize is ridiculous. I sought out many people online to see if they knew more about any victims. That included GCers, with the most prominent person being Graham Linehan, who I later interacted with often. He knew I was not gender critical, yet he was willing to talk. Having such a prominent GCer seem kind and to also be on my side about something was confusing to me. I was directed by him to other GCers who might have information about the notorious person. They were also open to speaking with me. Given that the subject was about potential sexual harassment, I was all emotion, no reason. A big part of this is that I was violently sexually assaulted by a stranger in my parents' garage as a young teen. By a cis man, I should emphasize. I had never really dealt with that assault, and any potential situations of any kid being harmed was incredibly triggering. This is not an excuse for anything. It's more an explanation for my obsession about the notorious woman's antics. She often mocked people who were concerned about her. The deeper I got into interacting with GCers, the further I moved away from being a trans ally. I can't remember now any reason other than that single notorious person whom I found so alarming. That very fact, though, shows how flimsy my allyship really was at that time. It was based more on me feeling like I was being a great advocate rather than any true understanding of the LGBTQ+ community. I was big about tweeting my own voice, but horrible about listening. I've always been a blabbermouth, so all it really took was this one situation combined with welcoming, seemingly concerned GCers for me to turn. When I say turn, I mean a total 180, as I actively helped create a Canadian GC coalition, COSBAR, which I'll always be ashamed of having done. Probably the worst thing I ever did, as the group has since grown and my role can never be undone. The entire time I was involved in the GC cult, that's how I think of it now, I thought I was protecting girls and women, and couldn't comprehend how narrow-minded and bigoted I was being, as girls and women only meant cis. In Canada, if one identifies as trans, they are trans, which GCers explained was a horrific loophole that predatory men would use to take advantage, harm innocent girls and women, always only cis the focus. Images of giant men with wigs or dresses saying they were trans women and then forcing themselves into female changing rooms, prisons, and sport were constantly described with extremely rare examples given. GC rhetoric, which is not science, as they like to think, but bigotry and fear-mongering, preyed on the nightmares of any cis woman who had been assaulted. Again, invariably by a cis man, not a trans man or a trans woman, but that part was always ignored. A few of my online trans friends initially reached out to me, asking me what the hell was happening and if I'd been pulled into a cult. I'm sure that their worry eventually turned to disgust and hurt as I tweeted against the very community I'd once supported. A few of my online trans friends initially reached out to me, asking me what the hell was happening and if I'd been pulled into a cult. I'm sure that their worry eventually turned to disgust and hurt as I tweeted against the very community I'd once supported. I should note that none of my friends or family agreed with me, and that they would often argue with me or else change the subject to shut me up. I've since learned that some of my family were embarrassed of me, as well as baffled, given that I had never been blatantly prejudiced before. But at the time, I just didn't see it. It was bizarre, especially because I've always been a lefty. I'm both a Democrat and a liberal, dual citizen, and have never wavered from voting for these parties. This belief system stayed with me throughout my time as a GCer and actually helped push me out. The reason for this is because our coalition, and many GCers themselves, claim to be nonpartisan and believe that aligning with anyone who supports the sex-based rights of girls and women is to be encouraged. That created a wedge in my thinking. How could I be okay to align with people who were against access to abortion or who believed that same-sex marriage was evil? How could I be comfortable with being connected to those who were against immigration of minorities or vehement gun nuts? When I voiced my concerns to others, most discounted them. Better to have a big group of voices over this one issue, I was told, even if it basically meant, to me, selling your soul to the devil. I realized I couldn't do that. And eventually, after disengaging more and more from my GC coalition, I left it. I should point out that many GCers now claim to be politically homeless, especially in Canada. They aren't really. They have become increasingly right-wing, with a disturbing trend of being anti-vax and anti-mask as well. Not that surprising, as GCers often believe that Big Pharma is part of a giant trans conspiracy. Many people who are currently GCers were once lefties like me. In my opinion, those who have stayed have bought into the fear. The faceless boogeyman who will attack cis girls and women and take cis lesbians. A few months after leaving the GC cult, I wrote a piece on Medium which got a lot of attention. I wanted to make it clear that I both regretted and didn't agree with another piece I'd written 2 years before for a GC online mag. Members of my former coalition were horrified, and a few reached out in anger. The rest pretended I had never existed, as admitting I existed would mean admitting that even fervent GCers could leave. Since then, I have tried to start listening to the LGBTQ+ community more, rather than believing I am such a great advocate. I guess it's the difference between viewing people as so vulnerable that you are actually infantilizing them, and viewing people as individuals with dignity, who are worthy of respect as intelligent, autonomous people who have a lot to teach you.
For Carol Marinera's way out of the groups, I said my farewells. In typical angry SJW fashion, I typed a long, condescending letter admonishing them for their wicked ways. I made sure to tell them that I'd be publishing screenshots, but that I would anonymize anyone who wasn't a notable public figure who has identified themselves publicly as part of the gender critical movement. So as you've seen, that was basically like what? 4 or 5 people who are already known primarily for being gender critical already. But of course, their response was to completely ignore the context of what I wrote and the contents. Instead, rumors spread of the TRA Carol, who was threatening to dox everyone and strip them of their livelihoods, despite clearly having been told the exact opposite in the posts they were linking to and commenting on. Now, it bears repeating that gender-critical ideology leaves you with worms for brains. Keep that in mind when you witness the mind-bogglingly ridiculous reactions to my reveal posts.
Look, everyone, a f***ing
Ladies and gentlemen, gender-critical feminist.
Hands in the bucket if you think this is an incel who doesn't go outside, plays computer games in his basement, and throws darts at pictures of women.
2 out of 5 is pretty bad. I don't go outside and I play computer games. But I'm not an incel, I'm a skank. And I have no basement because my generation in Canada will never be able to afford a home. I also don't have darts because this isn't 1983, boomer.
It's absolute madness that gender critical people have been put into a position where we have to hide what we think, as if we're part of some kind of secret KKK or neo-Nazi group.
Maybe stop acting like the KKK then.
I feel so much empathy for those who literally fear for their livelihoods if their problematic, science-based, rational beliefs are discovered. I've recently begun sharing gender-critical articles, videos, etc. on my main page, and must remember how privileged I am that the most I have to fear is possibly offending some family member I never see.
Some even resorted to calls for my violent rape with weapons.
Oh, look, a TRA threatening to dox people who don't share her or his worldview. We're hateful, yet these people want to get people fired and lose their livelihoods. Marinara sauce can get with 1,000 sharp sticks.
Oh, go f yourself, shit, Sherlock.
I'm wondering if the Sun has got her login.
These 2 killed me.
You do realize people are here because they are harassed if they say things elsewhere, not because they are ashamed of their opinions. So unless the point here is to have people harassed, I'm not sure anyone has a problem with you sharing their perspectives with a broader audience.
Oh, great, thank you. I'll do that then.
If this person is doing a research project, it's really unethical not to ask the group or reveal themselves and their intentions. Same if they were a journalist. If we find out their real name, I assume they are using a pseudonym, it may be worth contacting their unit or publication.
Sorry, but when you investigate hate groups, it's not unethical to pretend to also be a bigot.
Please, feel free to publish anything I post, Carol dear. My page is public, glad of the extra airings. Are you a spaghetti sauce?
I think she was trying to, like, make fun of me, but she doesn't get that my very obvious name was making fun of them?
Go dilate, hun.
Not this freak trying to get me gaped. You could at least buy me Glinner first. Future Kaylin, do not put that in. This cult or movement, hate group, whatever you want to call it, the mask it wears is all it has to defend itself. Pull it off. Shine a light on what's underneath. Even this series has not fully captured the breadth of their hatred and their anger. I tried to give more context with more screenshots here, so feel free to check them out. I have tens of thousands, and organizing and uploading them is a project in and of itself. So I'll be adding more to these over time, so follow me here and on Twitter for updates if you want them. This is also why I'm going to take what I learned and edit it down to a more structured book. If you want to donate a little something to cover expenses like editors and publishing fees, I've set up this link here. Otherwise, if you want to support me and get behind the scenes content, I've started making a little zine while planning and researching in that little phase of my videos. And those are available only for my lovely little patrons on Patreon. And Very Poor, help me. If you enjoyed this series despite the dark subject matter or found it useful, there are so many people doing this work who know a lot more about it than I do, who have put in a lot more time than I have on this. And I think in order to achieve our goals, we need to make sure that we are a network, that we work together. So I've created a page on my website where you can go and follow the people that are doing this work. Thanks, love you, bye.